Welcome back to Razmafzar TV. I'm really happy to be back here on our channel. Hi, Bede. How are you doing? Welcome to Razmafzar.
Good. How are you?
Thank you very much, Bede. Today we are going to talk about a very important topic, and it's about, Ottoman army, the mighty Ottoman army and empire, which faced different, let's say, adversaries, opponents, among them Europeans. I was informed that there were some claims that Ottomans, or the Ottoman army, never, or hardly, or never even, faced let's say, heavily armored European knights. And when I heard that, I just asked myself, where does this idea come from? Ottomans didn't even, not only faced Persians, not only faced, okay, let's say Central Asians or whatever, Caucasians or whatever, they were involved, or down there to the Arabs, lands, or in North Africa, of course they faced Europeans. And now where does this idea come from that the Europeans whom Ottoman faced were not heavily armored? So, Bede, that's the whole idea of today. And we are going to show some, again, Ottoman armor from 15th to 16th century from that period, and also European armor from 15th to 16th century from St. Petersburg Museum, Russia, from Musée d'Armée in France, and also in Paris, and from Musée Historique in Strasbourg, also in France, the European ones. So, Bede, I give the floor to you, please.
Okay. Well, I find it quite amusing, I suppose. The thing I think a lot of people that have a superficial understanding of medieval history don't realize that heavily armored knights were very popular in places like Serbia and all through the Balkans. So it wasn't just a European phenomenon. And there are very good books on the equivalent that you see in English and French churches, where you have somebody's buried and they have a kind of image of them in armor, with their arms over their sword. Well, this was also done in places like Bohemia, down all the way through to I think Bulgaria as well. So, like in the 15th century, when they were fighting the Ottomans for the first time, they were fighting as heavily armed European knights. And I think people lose that because unless you've read books about their arms and army, you wouldn't realize how similar. Prague, there's statues of kings and whatever wearing full plate armor, and beautiful statues, something like that. So it's, first of all, ignorance of the area in which the Ottomans were fighting in Europe. Secondly, it's ignorance of the fact that large contingents of French and German knights came to fight the Ottomans with the Hungarians and the Transylvanians. So that also gives you the wrong impression. The place that European armor proved the most useful, from my reading, fighting Ottoman forces, was in the Siege of Malta, when in a siege context where you couldn't get out of the way, wearing full plate armor was really useful because there were people attacking you from all sides and you couldn't duck. And the Ottomans did not succeed in that. It was one of the first big defeats, that and Lepanto. But bear in mind, the Ottomans did take Candia in, the there were big European fortifications all through the Aegean, which they conquered. So Malta was a long way away when you think about it.
Yes,
I mean, they
true.
were lucky they had all these excellent North African sailors. And, I think at the Siege of Malta, Dragut, who was one of the lieutenants of Khairuddin Barbarossa, who I saw something interesting on the other night. His brother had a red beard, Aruj, and he got the name Barbarossa. When Aruj died, Khairuddin, who didn't have a red beard, had his beard dyed red so he could keep up the family name. But I don't know how true that was, but it was a good story. I liked it. Uh, so you've got this thing where people coming at the subject are interested in the subject, but they don't necessarily have access to all of the information. So if you don't know that heavy cavalry in full armor was common in the Balkans, then you would kind of wonder who the Ottomans were fighting and think they're fighting light cavalry or something like that, which was light cavalry there, but particularly in the Balkans, there was a lot of heavy cavalry, and the armor was good, and they were using swords that were used everywhere in Western Europe. So even though it was orthodox, it was separated by families, like the royal families in these countries weren't very closely related to the Western royal families. They were often intermarried with the Byzantines. Um, it was very Western. And Hungary, uh, at the time of the first invasions, before the fall of the Arpad dynasty, uh, was a combination of Western and Eastern, because the Hungarians were aware that when you're fighting people that move really fast, you need people of your own to move really fast. But they gradually became more Westernized because the royal family changed. There was influence from Western Europe into their military styles. So by the time of the Battle of Mohacs, there was a large number of fully plate armored Hungarian heavy cavalry.
Yes.
So it was there definitely were heavy armed cavalry with full armor, depending on the period, more armor later on, who the Ottomans fought in pitched battles.
Yes. Very, very interesting and very good. Exactly, because I think this false idea comes from the fact of, let's say, if today's people or contemporary people who are interested in certain type of arms and armor, right, like in Eastern Europe, and I think maybe it also, and then people go to, I don't know, people go to reenactments, or people go to SCA events, reenactment events, and then they get this impression, okay, because these guys are, you know what I mean, this light
Oh
cavalry
yeah,
from Eastern Europe. I think these ideas come from there because people, and you see that, because, we work with antiques, we work with research, we work with publications, we work with manuals, historical manuals, but then, it's just that, I don't want to just put anyone's down, but, the guy says, okay, they show a reproduction sword, which is not even sharpened, right? It's not made of a modern steel. It's not even forged. It's just, well, stock removal, right? And then they
yeah,
say, okay, the Seljuks use this type of swords, and then there's nothing wrong with that. But guys, let's face it, these are not historical facts. These are just some assumptions of,
yeah, yeah. I mean, I know of only one Seljuk sword. There's a blade. The tang is broken. There's no hilt or anything like that. A really nice, mildly curved saber with, I think it's got a yeoman. I've got photographs of them in a book, and I mean, but they're not all over the place. And the art of the time, they're good to give you general ideas about swords, but there were tropes in painting swords, like the concave yeoman trope,
Yes.
which I've yet to find a sword that has a concave yeoman that isn't European made. And actually, a lot of European art depicting Eastern peoples, instead of the painters using models of original weapons, they're using European falchions
Yes, they
because
do.
they're single-edged swords, so they must be the same. And then these clip-pointed ones, that the kind of classic
Yes.
Hollywood scimitar, to use a word that's been used to death. These are all imaginary in the sense that there were sort of something like that in China, but they certainly weren't used in the Middle East. And you kind of think, well, what really happens, I think people in reenactment societies and things like that try to do whatever research they've got available materials for. But once an idea gets born in one of those places and gets into the gaming illustration world, that's when you start to see things go off the rails. I like watching historical analysis of battles and that on YouTube. And one of the things is in the last few years, they've been using a lot of animation from games.
Yes.
And the problem is that the animations are they may be based on an Osprey book, or they may be based on something somebody's come up with as here's a way we can make armor that looks just like the old stuff. But they're not even trying to make armor. They're trying to make something that looks like armor. But then that gets translated into these, wonderful animated figures and that. And of course, nothing is based on anything that actually was used. It's based on ideas to do something which may not be to be trying to be really historical. Because a lot of people in reenactment groups say, well, this is as good as I can do with my materials and whatever, and I'm trying to get as close to historical as I can. You can't blame people for being limited by either their resources or their income or whatever, or their time.
Absolutely.
But when, as I say, gaming companies use it because people like it, and then all of a sudden you have hundreds of Ottomans in kind of dagged jackets with little floppy bits on the bottom, which comes from a particular illustration by Angus McBride, which is based on a misinterpretation of carving or something like that, and or maybe even a misinterpretation of a Byzantine commentary on something. And you go, wait a minute, that doesn't make sense. But it's all over the internet, and people say, oh, well, yeah, but I've seen it everywhere I go. I see it, and it looks like that, so it must be true. And right. Doing research isn't easy work, and double checking everything you find to make sure you haven't misinterpreted it, or somebody else has written down something that they thought was true, but it turns out they hadn't paid close attention to the facts or the source materials. I say facts is probably a bad word for it, because facts implies true or not true, but we're talking about people writing something down 500 years ago in as much as they understood it, and sometimes in a style that they thought was appropriate. And if something didn't fit into the style, they dropped it out. So therefore, trying to kind of come to grips with historical reality when your sources are a bit wobbly to start off with, they're not complete, things are left out, then it's really hard. The advantage that we've got with, say, talking about the Ottomans and fighting in Renaissance Europe is there is a lot of stuff in museums you can go and look at.
Yes, it is.
And I think that's the ultimate cure for this problem. 13th century is a lot harder.
Absolutely. Let us just go through this, and then we can, we talked about it in another one, but we are going to have them again together, and so we can have.
Oh, that looks. I love this.
You have on the left side a beautiful Ottoman Sipahi cavalry, and on the right side beautiful armor. Right, French European, mostly French, but also European on the right side. So they are both from 1520 to 1540, 60, 1520 to 60, same period of time. So
what strikes me is, of course, we think in terms of the European armor is almost a sculpture. It's a an outer skin for the horse, but a rigid one. Whereas the Ottoman one, and so Akoyanlu, Karakoyanlu, and early Safavid, and even Mamluk, it's more like, rather than a sculpture that fits on top of the horse, it's a suit, like a suit of clothes. So it's flexible and it molds itself around the horse rather than being shaped with the horse. The advantage of the Ottoman one is if the horse loses weight or puts on weight, the armor still fits.
Yes.
Uh, uh, the advantage of the European one is it's really hard to find a place to stab the horse because it covers a lot of the horse. But on the other hand, you're not going to be able to go up and go bang, 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 because there'll be other people standing around who will probably hit you when you're not looking. The really massive amount of force that you need to penetrate armor is only possible if nobody is kind of distracting you by trying to stab you at the same time. And this is one of the things that you see. I mean, say in European fighting, they have rondel daggers, which are excellent for getting into the crevices in the armor and stabbing people. But they require you to be uninterrupted when you're doing it because you've got to actually concentrate on finding that part while you're fighting somebody, which shows your skill. But if there's somebody else around, they can take advantage of the fact you're concentrating on something and stab you in the back, so to speak.
Absolutely.
So we don't always understand how difficult it is to get through armor.
It's a very good point you mentioned, Bede, and it's a very good point. The more, I do martial arts, I do armored or unarmored combat, the more, and, I think, that in the past, different empty-handed full contact fights, armored fight. But the more time goes by, the more I come to the conclusion, all these things we do, right, teaches you to concentrate on one-on-one situations.
Yeah.
All you do. You see, and
Yeah.
people, for example, come and say, what about this lighter armor, lighter, I just put quotation marks, against the heavily plated armor. And they always assume that an Ottoman is fighting against a heavily armored European knight, then this guy is an advantage. But in a battlefield, no one fights one to one. If the troops move, they get dehydrated, they get fatigued, and then they're outnumbered, they're encircled, they get, again, lots of hits they get, lots of shots they get at. Then the meaning of armor gets a different significance, or it gets something else, and this is extremely important. I think one of the biggest problems which I started, actually, I started when pandemic happened. When the pandemic happened, I was always in MMA gym doing boxing, kickboxing, Muay Thai, then Razmafzar and this and that. Pandemic forced me to train outside, solo trainings, to be with the nature. And all of a sudden, I got another understanding. I said, you don't need just to do bang, bang with a person. You're fully correct about that. What about I'm concentrating on this guy in front of me? Someone comes, stabs me in an opening in my armor. Someone shoots at me.
And then the neck of your helmet goes up a bit, and somebody goes, spine. Yeah, I mean the concept that either armor is fully protective or only partially protective is wrong. If you're moving, then you move when you can see someone striking at you to put your armor or your shield or your weapon in between you and that person. When you're grappling in armor, your vision is terribly restricted. And you're not holding on to a person, you're holding on to pieces of metal that are moving around on a person.
Yes.
I don't know how it would work. I know it was practiced. Grappling and armor was practiced in a lot of cultures because it was considered important. But one of my friends had an Ottoman dagger, like a walrus ivory hilt, but a very short, slightly curved blade, and it was lenticular. The thing that it was a, watered steel Johar blade. but it was so strong, and the grip of the dagger was so positive that it was, it was seriously meant for bashing on somebody to get through the gaps in their armor. Because we say, oh, there's a gap in the armor, but there may be padding under that, there may be mail. It's a gap only compared to the hardened steel of the breastplate, or even in the case of the Ottoman armor, those strips on the body and on the horse, they probably would stop most random stabs from a sword or a dagger. They definitely wouldn't stop firearms. And depending on luck, they may or may not stop arrows. But the thing is, the ones they stop means that you don't have to worry about that one, and you can strike at that guy, or you can strike at the other guy, whoever's the most important to hit. I've read descriptions of battles where people were fighting with swords against other people fighting with swords. And it sounds really chaotic. People are grabbing your horse's reins, or they're grabbing your other arm, the arm you're holding your reins with, and they try to pull you out of your saddle. All these things are going on at the same time. And as well, you're trying to keep together with your fellow soldiers moving towards an objective, a goal. You're trying to drive or break this part of the enemy's army. So these things are really, I mean, you know what you're doing, you know what you want to do, you know how to fight, but it's still chaotic because there are so many people involved. And, some are moving forward, some are moving back, some are, well, the thing that when they're talking about, when we were talking about lance fighting in Iran, when you've got a lance that you're either holding here or down here or overhand, and it's got a spike on the other end, you've always got to be aware that there are people behind you. When you're fighting one-to-one and there's no one close, you can do all kinds of things
Yes.
with your pole arm. But when you've got somebody standing or on a horse a couple of meters behind you, and your backswing from your lance when you were pulling it back to stab someone because you've grabbed it near the hilt to maneuver to someone close, the other end of that lance could hit someone behind you. And I mean, we call it in modern friendly fire where people get hit by accident, but it must have happened all the time.
Yes,
Particularly
absolutely.
when people were close together.
Absolutely. If we move on, we talked about that. I mean, in the detail when we talked about Ottoman armor and horse armor, but just let's say if we come back, this was the type of, Ottoman, if you want to go Sipahi, which they cavalry in Ottoman terms had,
Yeah.
and then they faced this, right? So just wanted to mention that as far as yes, go ahead.
And the important thing is that the Sipahi cavalry did charge home. They weren't always wheeling away and things like that. The problem that a heavy knight in full armor with full barding on his horse is, he can't charge for very long because his horse will overheat. So they managed their charges. They didn't, well, they tried not to charge at full gallop because you don't want your horse to have a heart attack just when you reach the enemy. So they managed, I mean, even in the 19th century, it was considered really important to, when they charged, they didn't charge at a gallop, they charged at a trot. And the full approach was done, at a much slower pace, not a walk, but no full on pace, so that they could keep their lines continuous, so that they could keep their horses under control. You don't want everybody, because if you go at a gallop, what happens is the guys on the fast horses end up way out in front and the guys on the slow horses end up way back. And the whole thing doesn't work. It's just a collection of individuals instead of a troop or a regiment. And so what I'm trying to say is that the European knights were very much aware of the problems that they would have. Now, Sipahi, I don't know of anyone that's done any tests on this, but in general speaking, the way those armors sit on the horse, I would think that the horse would have more stamina because he's not carrying as much weight. They're not light, though. It's very important to understand they're still quite heavy. But it's well distributed. There are no hard points where it could dig into the horse. You notice we very rarely do you see anything that would reach to the below the very top of the horse's leg, because the horse's legs are moving up high. You don't want armor on the legs.
Yes.
Because it's going to interfere with the horse.
Can we say that, approximately, I'm not saying this armor faced that armor, but approximately, we could say that when Ottoman Sipahi attacked Europe, let's say, and faced the European forces, at least first, let's say, in the Eastern Front, they could have faced such armor.
Yeah. I mean, the percentage of people in a European army that could afford full horse barding, I don't know what it is, but they'd be the guys in front, so they would be the ones causing the most difficulty. So the idea that you would have when you're facing people in this kind of equipment is you want to attack them when they're not moving, and you want to get out of the way when they charge you. So the most damage that European knights' chargers did was when the enemy was bunched up and couldn't get out of the way. So you would, if you were a European commander, you would wait till the enemy cavalry was a bit disorganized and bunched together as they were getting ready to split up or form another line. Then you'd charge.
Yes.
And then they would do damage to themselves by their horses running into other horses as they try to turn around and that. One of the things that you see in say, Turkish cavalry was the spacing between the horses was greater, just so they could spin around and get out of the way. Whereas in the Europeans, starting back in the days of mail and kite shields in the First Crusade, their idea was to be knee to knee and charge in a block, which made it very difficult to separate out the individual people. The problem with charging in a block is if you shoot three guys in front, everybody behind them falls over because they can't get over the bodies of the horses and that. And in fact, that's why shooting horses was really quite a common thing, because if the horse went down, this is a big thing blocking the forward movement of the troops. So if you had 3 rows of horsemen and some parts of the front row went down, then everything behind that part of the front row has to go around. I mean, they're not going to leap over the downed horse and man because they're wearing armor, and leaping over things is not that easy. And it's interesting because, say, in the times of the Byzantines, say under the Emperor Maurice, back in 600, their cavalry was, in 7 lines, 5 to 7 lines. So there would be, rank, because they managed this, this problem of running into each other. They had spaces, they had it all worked out, they trained for it. But this is why archers were dangerous to heavy cavalry, because the guys in front probably were safe and their horses were probably safe, but if you hit one of the guys behind them, then all the guys behind him were inconvenienced. He might be dead, his horse might be dead, his horse might panic and gallop off in the wrong direction and cause chaos. It's I think people that have ridden in groups know how much work goes into it. I mean, horses will herd. Horses will tend to stay in a group rather than break off from it once they're used to that particular group of horses. But people on horses can panic, can get disoriented. So sometimes too dense a cluster can be really dangerous. I wouldn't like to be either side in one of these battles, to be honest.
We had these at Musée d'Armée as well. They call it Mamluk, Ottoman Mamluk or whatever. From the same period, we talked about it as well. You see that with the St. Petersburg peace, they have lots of similarities.
And notice how high up the armor comes under the horse's neck. It's particularly high in the Musée d'Armée one. I would the helmet looks very Ottoman. There were Mamluk helmets that look like this as well, and the stirrups look very Ottoman too. But it's very hard to say. The saddle is definitely not Turkish. It's European. Um,
Yes.
but the it could be Balkan. It could prove the fact that European styles were very prominent in the Balkans.
Yes.
Um, but it's a good armor in the sense that the mail linking the plates, it's only 3 rings at a time. There's
Mm.
not very much mail there to have a gap to get things through, and even it's not really a gap unless you do a full-on spear thrust with a sharp armor-piercing pointed spear. So it's pretty good armor. It would be extremely good for long-range harassing archery because
Yes.
it would deflect arrows really quite effectively.
Yes. It is not that,
But
people always think, oh, I get a 120 pound bow and I can go through any armor. Guys, it doesn't look like that. Come on. It is not like that.
no, you need a number of things in your favor.
Yes.
It's one of the reasons. Whereas I am fully in agreement when you've got a line of people there and a line of people there, when you're shooting, it doesn't matter which individual you're shooting at as long as you hit somebody.
Yeah.
It doesn't mean you don't aim. It could mean in certain places they actually trained for that distance. So they weren't aiming at individual targets, they were aiming at that distance. But mostly people aimed at individual targets. Now, when you aim at individual targets, if you're close enough, you're aiming for any exposed area like the face or anything like that. Now, when you look at this armor, from front on, the chamfron on the horse protects the upper part of the horse's neck because the horse's head is down a little bit. In the style of riding, look. I don't know whether the bit's original, probably not, but this type of cavalry often rode with a version of a curb bit or a ring bit, which causes the horse to bend its neck. So that front part of the horse's head with plate armor on it is the part facing the enemy. So that's a good defense for the horse. The kind of close plate and mail down the lower part of the neck and the chest of the horse, almost to its knees, which isn't its knees, but you know what I mean. That again, if it gets hit by something like an arrow, the arrow might, if it was up close or whatever, might be able to penetrate it, but that's moving backwards and forwards.
Yes, it is.
Unlike the European armor that's strapped to the horse quite tightly because they don't want the wrong piece of armor to get in the wrong place because it interferes
Yes.
with the horse's movement. This is like a curtain swinging backwards and forwards.
Yes.
And so therefore it absorbs energy when it's struck. Doesn't mean somebody couldn't shoot an arrow into the mail between the links. It'd be really hard.
Very hard.
It's
Yes.
more luck than good management, but it's possible. So individual soldiers could be killed or wounded. But in general, if you had 100 soldiers and they were subject to a barrage of arrows or javelins or whatever, probably 90 of them would be fine.
Yes.
And that 90 are the ones that are going to kill you. Oh, I love that. That's beautiful. The one
Yes.
that you just started to show.
Yes. Yes. And
I
now
love
we,
these.
we, we come here that as well. This is this so-called as from the German word Krug armor. I mean, if you
Yeah.
use it this, but guys, Ottomans, didn't use plate. Ottomans didn't use plate. Guys, what is this?
Yeah.
Ottomans didn't
And,
use
and
plate.
the steel quality was quite good in these too, from what I remember. Uh, this is the
Bede, can
classic
I
thing.
ask you a question? Do you see any
Yeah.
plates here?
Oh, just a few. Just a few. Maybe they're made of that invisible steel that we've all heard about. No,
Exactly.
it's stealth armor. You can't see. He's wore a coat over it. Nobody knew he had it. But you see the design of the central disc
Yes.
is convex, and making curved plates in European plate armor was a thing that they did specifically to deflect points coming off.
Yes.
And this is the same idea, concentrated on the most vulnerable part of the front of your body. Spears, arrows, swords. This is where your, well, from below your rib cage is your abdomen, which has got no protection naturally. Your rib cage is protection for your lungs and heart, but again, a strong blow will go through it.
Yeah.
But this armor protects the upper part of the rib cage there. It protects the abdomen and the upper part of the abdomen, lower part of the rib cage. But it's built in a way that's relatively flexible, so you can bend down and pick things up. Somebody said to me once, "Oh, let's go horse riding." I said, "I'm not up to it." And they said, "Why?" And I said, "Well, I'd need help mounting a horse." And they said, "Well, we can help you mounting a horse." And I said, "But the point about riding a horse is if you're out in the field and you fall off a horse, you can get back on the horse. If you need help to mount a horse, it's okay for just general riding, but the concept behind it is that you're only good enough until you fall off your horse and you can't get back on without assistance." And I always felt, like, it just didn't seem right. I suppose it's because I was interested in the historical side of riding and not just the experience of riding, which it would be worth it. And I mean, I've seen people that use mounting blocks and things like that, and I don't blame them. And it was used all over the world. It wasn't just in Europe. I think it's a good thing if you have to ride. Anything to get you on the horse is good enough. If you it's this kind of choice. In the armor, you're looking at this fitted over a male shirt, so it wasn't worn by itself. Some of the other armors with plates in them were definitely worn by themselves, but this was it may even be a reaction to European weapons.
Yeah. Yeah, maybe.
It may, because you don't see Krug style armors in Iran or India, for instance.
Exactly.
Yeah, I mean,
Yes.
maybe an imported one. You see them occasionally in Russia, but again, maybe imported. So probably there was a definite threat. And when you think about it, this seems to be designed to protect you more strongly, but without restricting your movements.
Yes, without. Absolutely without.
Yeah. So that was
For
always a prime.
example, we say, okay, Europeans use plate armor. I would like to stress that. Guys, look, not all Ottoman armor was Joshan, as we saw before. We would like to
Yeah.
point out this Ottoman, this is European from the same period, just to have
Yeah.
comparison, right?
Yeah.
Yes.
And there's a lot of features in that armor that are designed to be protective, but there are other features that are just designed to follow fashion.
Yes.
So the shape of the breastplate is fashion. It serves no practical purpose in armor. It just shows that you can afford to get a really good armor to make something that looks like the kind of jacket that people like to wear. But there are really practical things. You see at the arm openings, you see there are little sliding plates so you can bring your arm in and take your arm out and still be protected.
Yes.
So
Absolutely.
some things that look decorative are actually practical, and things that look practical. And remember that shape in the breastplate is practical because it deflects weapons away. But the reason it's that particular overall shape is because it's copying fashion.
Yes.
And in fact, there are armors where they even copy the buttons going up the front of it. So
Yes.
it's important to realize that if you were a rich man and you had to fight and you needed armor, you would buy armor. You're going to spend a lot of money on it, so you'd pick stuff that appealed to you as well. I want to be safe in this, proof test it, whatever. But it's got to look good because a suit of armor was probably close to the equivalent of buying a Lamborghini.
Yeah.
I mean, at the top end.
On the top,
And
absolutely.
so therefore you want it to look nice. No, I want it in that color. These are human beings doing this.
Yes.
And
Yes.
I mean, we don't understand all the things that motivated people, but you only have to look at this to realize that
Yes.
there's a lot of display. And I mean, armors like this that are highly decorated. This is clearly that's for display, but look at the way the armor's put together. That's for real practical use.
Yes.
So
Absolutely.
you've got a kind of and somebody wearing armor like this might be the kind of armor that people were wearing at the Siege of Malta, where they had to defeat people climbing up the walls on ladders and whatnot. It's a it's a very practical armor, but it's very decorative because the person that had it made could afford it.
Yes.
And they're
Yes.
telling everybody else, pay attention to me. I'm rich and I've got good armor. You're in trouble.
Just we talked about it when we had this discussion on French armor before. But what are these holes for?
Well, I'm not sure on this armor. The other armors we looked at, there were holes on this side here for a lance rest to be taken on or taken off. So if you're on horseback, you need a lance rest. Yeah, that's exactly it. When you're on foot, the lance rest just gets in the way. And I mean, they were folding, they had all kinds of features.
Yes.
But that is a funny place unless there was some see it doesn't, they're not symmetrical on both sides of the chest. So it may represent something that was attached to the armor. If that color is not, well, that's the shadow of the sword or something. But it doesn't seem to be unless there's a strap that goes to something under the armor, and that's where the rivets were that held it.
Yeah.
And on now.
Yeah.
I mean, you give.
But look at the shoulder protection over the body armor. It gives him so much protection. Yeah. Look at this.
Yeah, and it's designed so you can move around in it as well.
Yes.
So you've got both the protection and the flexibility to. I mean, you've got to be able to do a sword strike. You've got to be able to, do this, that, do that. And this is. I mean, when you think about the amount of design that's gone into this, the armorers in families over centuries are working out better ways to make it work.
Yes.
And, this is really good.
I love the back. Yes. Yeah, we just want to have a comparison between what you Ottomans faced. Okay, that Krug armor gives you a solid plate also in the back, but here there's this, to use the Persian term joshan, these are these overlapping plates, and then with riveted mail.
Yeah, well, see, this is, I mean, and this was popular all the way up into Russia. Bektas and things like that were very popular. Probably among the Crimean Tatars as well.
Yes.
Reason is, it gives you still got all the flexibility, and you can almost fold it up like a coat and put it in a box when you're traveling. You can put it on like a coat. Somebody wearing this armor doesn't need someone to help them get dressed.
Yes, no.
And you can put it on quickly because you just put your arms in the sleeves and do the straps up the front, and you're done.
Yes.
So it's got a lot of advantages that way. If you got a stroke across the back with a sword or something on the edge, this is going to protect you as well as anything.
Yeah, it does. Yeah.
The advantage of a solid backplate like in European armor is that absorbs a lot of, it spreads the shock out, whereas this doesn't do it as efficiently. The question is this enough?
Yeah.
I mean, really, how do you know exactly how much you need to make it work? To me, I've tried on an old one of these armors many years ago when I was very thin, and they kind of cling to your body. They feel very fitted when you put them on.
Yes.
And I'm assuming, because you could make the back only has to bend, a human back can bend a little bit back that way and a lot that way. Yes. So you could actually make these in long strips, and you didn't have to put as many little plates in or anything. But they like this, and there was an argument back in the 30s or 40s that this was because they couldn't make large pieces of plate in Turkey and Iran. And this is not, it can't be proved because there's lots of things with large pieces of plate in them.
Yes, they could. Yes.
And you only have to look at that helmet. You've got to be really skilled at making large pieces of plate to make that helmet out of one piece of plate.
I have something to say, sir, because a guy, asked me about tableware, like these trays or whatever, spoons made of crucible steel. I said, yeah, I've seen that in museums a lot. Oh, why you take pictures? I'm not interested in tableware. But now, and now, and I said, oh, could you please next time when you go to museum do that? When you work for a museum, I said, yeah, I will do that. But Iranian curators know me of weapons, not just give me a
Yeah.
table whip. Anyhow,
Yeah,
but
I mean,
guys, I saw it really a tray, huge plate made of crucible steel, beautiful pattern in Iran. If they can make a plate that big, right? Of course they can make plates. They
well,
did it for
there's
Char Aine. They did it for
yeah.
everything, guys.
I think there's a shield, a Persian shield in the Kremlin armory, I think.
Yeah.
It's well, it's as big as that one behind me, but it's made of crucible steel
Yes.
with spiral fluting, with every other flute with gold inlaid
Yes.
figures
This
and
the
whatever. And I mean, the skill making a plate big enough is one skill level. Being able to then work that plate into something very complex without it deteriorating. Because I mean, I'm not that interested in forging because of the fact that it's really hot stuff and there's hot metal flying around and it's noisy and it's just not something I really like.
yes.
But I do appreciate the people that can do it because
Yes.
the
Yes.
degree of skill,
Yes.
and it's not just hammering it out into a shape, it's knowing how
Yes.
to keep the thickness
No.
constant, how to
Yes.
increase the strength by putting ribs in. And this is really skillful stuff.
Yes.
And they
I
didn't
know you.
have, I was going to say, they didn't have Wikipedia to look up to find out, oh, how do I do this bit? If Dad didn't teach you, you had to think of it yourself.
Now you remind me of. I also saw these crucible steel shields in Iran, which are also in arms armor from Iran. There are three or two
Yeah.
made of crucible steel, so they could make it. It was not because they couldn't. Now we go to hand protection. We talked about this. Oh, I
Yeah.
really love this. I really love this one. I
Yeah.
really love this.
You
Yeah.
don't see many plate and mail hand protections, probably because even if they were common, something like that is very easy to rust away.
Yeah.
Everything's small, and when it becomes detached from the buzzer band, people might know what it is. I remember I walked into an antiques arms fair many years ago, and there was a rusted iron Japanese single foot armor. You know, the thing they tie over your foot.
Yeah.
And no, but everybody walked past it and didn't know what it was. And I thought, well, that's really interesting. If I should have bought it. I wasn't interested in acquiring Japanese armor, and I'm still
Oh,
not in
pity.
specialist area. I like looking at it, and I've worn a set once, a real set, not a
Yes.
reproduction. And I thought it actually worked really nicely on the body.
Very nice.
Uh, but it's not. You can't. You can't pay attention to everything. You've got to limit yourself, otherwise you end up with a house like mine, full of books and weapons. So and saddles. Let's not forget the saddles. Though to be honest, I've only got 3 saddles, so I've got restraint. But it's I appreciate other styles of arms and armor.
Yes.
I mean, I appreciate European armor. I don't want to wear European armor. I'm not interested very much in European armor other than as a target for composite bows and meze kind of weapons. But it doesn't mean you can't enjoy the craftsmanship and
Yeah,
the
absolutely.
thought that's gone into it to make it all work.
Yes.
And I often think, well, remember the articulated hand that was made for that German knight that we saw in one of the museums?
Yes. Yes.
You just think that the knowledge of anatomy that these armorers had to develop was probably greater than some of the doctors of the time. I mean, in the 1500s, probably a lot greater, because they had to work with people and work out where the fingers would go when you close the hand and all
Absolutely.
that kind of stuff. And they had to work out other things that are even more complicated, like if you're holding a sword in a gauntlet,
Yes.
what happens if it gets knocked out? How do you move it round? How do you
Yes.
make sure it stays aligned?
Yes.
Because when you're
Absolutely.
doing it with bare hands, it's really easy to do something. But
Yes.
in
Absolutely.
gloves, it's a bit more difficult. In gauntlets, it's
Yes.
more difficult again. So when
This
they
is a
designed the
European
gauntlet,
gauntlet, just as the
Mhm.
comparison to Ottoman.
Yeah,
And this is what a European knight could
Well,
be
see,
very.
the major advantage of some European gauntlets is that they are better to protect against crushing blows.
Yes, crushing.
The Ottoman is clearly designed to protect from being cut and to a limited extent piercing blows. It's when you're fighting with spears, one of the targets that in okay in doing forms and katas and things like that, you're not trying to hit somebody's hand, but in real fighting, the hand was a major target. And
Major.
in Chinese spear fighting, the leading foot was a major target as well.
Yes.
Anything
Neyze
you put,
berdastadan is always mentioned. So you are
yeah,
hitting this as hand holding the
yeah.
neyze.
Well, I remember for, a Chinese friend of mine demonstrated one technique where you're holding the spear like this, and you suddenly move that hand out of the way, and you're holding the spear with one hand. And the
Yes,
reason is, of course, somebody strikes against the hand with the sword
yes,
or another spear.
that's right.
And and crushing blows, like if you flick a spear over like that
Yes,
and you hit someone in the hand,
yes.
that's a serious crushing blow.
Sure, series. And this is the
Yeah.
leg protection. So please, guys, take a look at that for our viewers. This is the leg protection. We talked about it in the
Yeah.
other video with Bede, right? The same concept. And if you go to the leg protection of the European knight, one of them, so to have just a
Mm.
comparison between this and
Yeah.
this.
So the major difference between is that Europeans fully form the leg
Mhm.
out of steel in terms of there's obviously multiple plates are involved and things like that, but it's basically an external sculpture of a person's leg, which means only people with that leg can comfortably wear that armor. This is custom made to a high degree, whereas the Ottoman armor is not one size fits all, but you probably only need 3 or 4 sizes of it
Yeah,
to cover your army.
yes,
So therefore, from an economic point of view, it's cheaper to make. And it means you can have more people in that level of armor. This type of armor, you've got to actually have it made for you. If you inherit your dad's armor and you're both the same size, fine. But if your dad was a bit bigger, then the armor's not going to work for you. And if he was a bit smaller, you won't even be able to put it on.
yeah,
And
exactly.
that's what I see when I look at this. You're a rich man. You've had, and by rich, I don't mean, incredibly wealthy, but you're a rich man. You can afford to have this stuff made for you. And maybe you need several armors during your lifetime because your body changes.
Yes.
I don't know. I don't know. Maybe when your body changes, you're not up to fighting anymore. I know that the clothes I bought 20 years ago don't fit me anymore.
Mm.
That could be just because I eat too much,
Yes.
but I think everybody changes. Helmets, on the other hand, your head stays the same size.
Yes, exactly. So this is the helmet, right? Ottoman helmet. We also talked about different types in a separate video with Beat about different
Yeah.
Ottoman helmets. You can go to that if you wish to know more. But just we wanted to have a comparison or a comparative
Yeah.
analysis. This is one of these so-called turban helmets here. And for example, I just put here a winged helmet, a Eastern
Yeah.
European winged helmet and an Ottoman
Yeah.
helmet. Yes.
Yeah,
Yes.
and when you take the wings off, the Zishag is basically an Ottoman helmet. I mean,
Yes.
uh, but the wings are great. I mean, they say they make a whistling noise and everything. I'm not sure you'd hear it over all the rattling of the armor and everything that was going on when your horse was galloping along. But
Yes.
you've got to say, if somebody wanted to show off and stand out in a crowd, this would really work for it. It might be it
Mm.
might have a limited amount of extra protection because notice it's ribbed, and the holes, whereas they're there for the whistling, they also reduce the overall weight of that piece of steel.
Yeah.
So
Absolutely.
it may actually be stronger than it looks. But the real purpose in its defensive thing is if somebody hits it, then their sword or their mace or whatever is going to be slowed down by it bending, and while they're off balance, then you stab them. It's it's a bit of a trap. I don't know how long they'd last in battle because I think everybody'd swing at them. Uh, it might be just the vandal in me. See,
Another
I love
Ottoman
this.
helmet. Just wanted you to
Yeah.
see the riveted mail protection
Mm.
of the face here, which it has this
Yeah,
one.
Yeah, it's interesting. I was actually when we were talking about the off camera a week or so ago. Uh, there's a Gelirid painting of two armies facing each other,
Yeah.
and there's a mix between in one group, all of the people in the back ranks of the army are wearing metal face covers,
Yes.
and in the other army, a lot of them are wearing mail that fits into the helmet, just leaving their eyes like
Yes.
that. All the people in the front rank, you can see their faces and their beautiful mustaches and everything, but the ranks at the back, and you might think the face masks are actually made to look like faces. They're not just blank. So they're like
Yes.
the surviving visors from Iran and parts of the Russian steppe, the Golden
Yes.
Horde area. So this was clearly used,
What
but
Pete mentioned about when the wings come off, it could be looking like this, for example.
yeah, yeah, and that's strongly from a German and Polish point of view. It's quite an Oriental looking helmet
Yeah.
because they've taken ideas from the Turkish helmets and
Yes.
adapted them. So instead of, I mean, I think the articulated plate neck guard is probably better than the mail neck guard in the sense that it would give more protection.
Yes. That's right.
Uh, it's going to be heavy, but if it was made right, it might not be as heavy as the mail. The
Yes.
ear guards are very Ottoman looking,
Yes.
and I think ear guards are a really good way of covering in that part of the face.
Absolutely.
Um,
And this was
and
Sultan
yeah,
Bayezid's helmet in Musée d'Armée. Also,
yeah,
just to make a comparison between the European one, the Polish one, and then the Ottoman one. Look at the neck guard, guys. Very
yeah.
nice.
So yeah, these solid articulated on like kind of long link chain neck guards are a thing the Ottomans developed, and I think they were really practical. This helmet originally would have had ear guards,
Yes.
probably.
Yes.
You can actually see the rivets for them
Yes, you
um,
can. Hmm.
in both photographs.
Yes.
That's where the
Mhm.
straps that hold the ear guards on, and the
Yes.
then straps from the ear guards went under
Yeah.
your chin.
Yes.
So yeah, but look at the similarities are amazing,
Amazing.
and it's the kind of Western armies that dealt with the Ottomans often adopted some of the Ottoman styles because they were practical.
Exactly.
Uh,
And
this
again,
helmet
okay,
was
we
very
talked about
expensive.
this one
Yeah,
and another Ottoman helmet. We also talked about it. Oh, again, guys, these helmets, Speed and I, we talked about them in detail, right? We just want to show for comparison here,
yeah,
right? Exactly. Same thing.
yeah. And
And
again, these fluted helmets are very strong. Now the next European ones, the Morians and
yeah,
well, they're halfway between a Capuset and a Morian. I suppose they'd be Morians. Now this is a helmet that gives you good view and good hearing,
yes,
and it uses the brim to intercept sword blows towards the face and neck.
yes, yes,
Uh, at the same time, it looks like a hat, and
yes,
therefore the old-fashioned thing comes into that too. But see, really innovative helmets in the 16th and 17th centuries before armor completely disappears, because the large-scale use of guns makes armor just something heavier dragging around with you,
yes,
except if you're in close fighting, like in
yes,
sieges or in, in,
yes,
in um,
yes.
light cavalry and things like that.
And then we
Yeah, I
come to
love
the
it.
last point, horse
Yeah,
armor,
yeah. See,
Ottoman one.
this is yeah, and look, this is a lot of metal in big plates.
Yes.
A point they it was their tradition to join the plates by mail. But you could, if you're a European armory, if you made one of these, you just have straps under the plates.
Yes.
It's so similar, and it
Yeah.
involves again large scale
Look the
metalwork.
similarities. For example, this is the horse armor again. If you take a look, Ottoman, and then look at this, European. This is the
And I mean,
European.
aside from the decorative spike on the
Yes,
European one, the fact it's hinged rather than with mail between it,
yes, hinged, yes.
the
But then
concept of
again, we, as you know, that for example, if you want to talk about that in Persian context, we had hinged char eine, then we had chine, which were with rings that were connected, then with belts that were connected. You know, this
yeah,
technology was there. It's not that the technology was
yeah.
not there, right?
There were hinged Bazabanda as well, and they're actually
Yes,
older than the ones with the
yes,
mail and straps. There are really old ones that were hinged.
yes,
So the technology between the different parts of the world, it was more a matter of emphasis than not having knowledge. People at the time said, "Oh, these people don't know how to do this," because they were making out that we're better than them. And it could be Ottomans talking about Europeans, or Europeans talking about
Yes.
Ottomans, or Ottomans talking about Persians, or Persians talking about Ottomans.
Like my
So
car is better than your car, right? Today.
my dad has a bigger lawnmower than your dad has. I mean,
That's true.
it's,
Okay, Bede, just to make a conclusion or concluding remarks, guys, Ottomans indeed faced heavily European armored knights, right, Bede?
yeah. And they worked out a lot of ways of dealing with them, and they were very successful at it too. Europeans didn't start winning major battles against Ottomans until after the Age of Armor.
Yes.
And they did it with lots of light cannons on the battlefield and lots of musketeers. It wasn't done by traditional knights in armor. They did not fare very well when they fought the Ottomans that way.
Yes. That's right. Thank you very much, Pete. It was a lovely discussion as usual, very informative. I wish you a nice day and hope to see you soon again on our channel, Pete. Thank you very much.
See you.
Bye bye.